Luncheon Cove has special memories as the entire flotilla came together for the second time. Beautiful weather, calm reflective water, abundant wildlife, memorable sandfly density. Launch Christina had made contact with some local fishermen during the day, and as a tranquil evening event was unfolding in the cove, the roar of a fishing vessel at speed entering the cove was at first startling. But with expert precision, they swung alongside the rafted vessels and threw over a bin of half a dozen enormous crayfish and a random cod expertly caught. Everything I'd read and heard about local fishermen down here was true. Trading and barter and laughter. Everyone's a brother in a remote wilderness.
These are the ones they won't sell, eh? They can't sell them, right? They want there's a lot of eaters
Next morning was a slow starter, but we all needed to keep moving north. What started out as an easy motor became a contrary tide and a headwind heading up Bowen Channel, before swinging due north up Acheron Passage between Dusky Sound and Breaksea Sound. Halfway up the passage, Wet Jacket Arm, a marine reserve, headed inland to the east, and just inside the entrance on the northern shore was Mussel Cove. The general idea is deep water anchoring with lines ashore, but choosing just where and how when solo ain't easy. I dragged anchor a couple of times and tried resetting it, by which time Christina had arrived, and after circling a couple of times we rafted up and were finally made secure with massively long stern lines. The wind also settled. The red hills in the sunset created a Nikon frenzy. Next morning I slipped the lines and out of the cove and the marine reserve and back into the Acheron Passage. Spotting a likely cod spot across the other side on the chart, I drifted next to a waterfall and caught my 2 cod dinner in under 10 minutes, before slowly proceeding north again to Breaksea Sound. A small pod of dolphins for company, I did a couple of large circles with them and proceeded to do the very unnerving activity of dipping a perfectly functioning camera into seawater. I don't think that will ever feel comfortable, but I got a very good look at my underwater companions. It occurred to me that my essentials of life had reduced to just a few simple things. Binoculars, VHF radio, gaffer tape, reading glasses and a cloth to wipe them, and lots of dead sandflies. A small puff of wind helped me round the corner into Breaksea Sound, but it was short-lived. I motored past some permanent settlements, Fiordland style, old ships and barges with helipads on the roof in Sunday Cove. I found some shallow mud and shingle behind harbour islands to drop an anchor and process the cod and have a lunch and a snooze before eventually drifting over to the north side into Second Cove as agreed to raft up with Christina again and share in their massive haul of groper they'd got during the afternoon. I got my chip fryer out, that's right, every boat should have one. I became a fish and chip shop for the evening. I have my mate Jason to thank for showing me how easy that trick is. I set the alarm clock early to catch an outgoing tide in the moonlight, and I quietly slipped the lines and drifted out of the Second Cove into Breaksea Sound. Dolphins joined me, leaping out of the water and splashing me in the cockpit. The entire sunning scene is etched in my memory. Then it began to get light, the sun came up, the moon went down, the wind kicked in, and then faded, and then the dolphins returned to welcome me past Dag Sound. What a day. A gentle swell heaving at the Hare's Ears rocks at the entrance of Doubtful Sound looked awesome, but all the signs were there that the wind was howling out of the sound, right on the nose. Doubtful Sound is a popular tourist destination and various vessels were making short work of it up the Parterre Passage. It took me quite some time to battle up the north side of Bazal Island to Te Awatu Channel, provided a much needed breather for Taranto and I. I started feeling a little bit guilty about being in such a privileged location and not making the effort to venture further inwards into the teeth of a mighty wind barrelling down the sound. I read the old Fiordland cruiser's guide. It said that Brown Falls, tumbling out of Lake Brown, 2/3 up the Malaspina Reach, was one of the most spectacular falls in all of Fiordland. Wow, that's really saying something. Enough said. So off I go, charging in I went, 4 huge tacks, then full-on motoring from just before Crooked Arm up to see the famous falls. With the sun on my back, music blasting in the headphones, Doubtful Sound. It doesn't get much better. The waterfall turned out to be a trickle. It hadn't rained heavily for a couple of weeks. I was glad I took the initiative though and pirated a mooring around from Brig Point. Next morning I headed over to Deep Cove. It's quite a settlement of sheds, decks, floating and permanent docks and moorings, and vessels of all shapes and sizes, mainly fishing vessels and large tourist carriers. It's most notable for the tail race. 2 tail races in fact, underground water tunnels, each around 10 metres in diameter and 10 kilometres in length, that drop 230 metres from the Lake Manapuri power station. They can discharge over 500 cubic metres a second while generating up to 850 megawatts. Why here, you ask? Well, its hydrodynamic generation potential was reported on and mapped way back in 1904, but it took the discovery of the world's largest bauxite deposit in Australia in 1955 to find a solid use for it. They shipped the refined bauxite alumina to Bluff and use the power to smelt it into aluminium metal. They also power a few Kiwi homes as well. It sure messes with the radio frequencies though. I couldn't get a weatherfax in Deep Cove. The rush of water also upset Christina's anchoring during the night, but I think that's a secret. But I tied up alongside for a cup of tea in the morning and diesel collection before sneaking around the corner into one of the most remarkable wildernesses I've ever had the pleasure to have experienced. Hall Arm on a clear, sunny, breathless day. It could be something to do with all the fresh water floating on top of the salt water, But a freaky looking phenomena was in action in those upper reaches of the deep fjords. What looked initially like a sandbar that made the pulse race at first glance was in fact something else. Perhaps an algae bloom or some sort of sediment in suspension. It was a thick, solid-looking cloud suspended in the water just beneath the surface, and my keel and rudder cut through it like soft butter. I wasn't overly keen on it getting pumped through the engine cooling system though. I managed to receive a couple of better weather faxes too, and I lingered in Hall Arm as long as practicable. In the back of my mind, I was waiting for the wind to start howling down the sound in the afternoon like the day before. Tragically, the opposite was true. This afternoon, the wind was blowing up the sound. Murphy's Law was in effect. I set out on another tacking jewel and down and out of Malaspina Reach, 14 of them according to the navman, before I finally succumbed to the inevitable reality. The last tack I'd made, it was clear I was actually losing ground. So I fired up the diesel and motor sailed as best I could across the reach towards Breaksea Sound. And as I was actually leaving the Malaspina Reach, Juana came cruising past. Made quite the picture. Then through Pendula Reach and sneaking north up into Thompson Sound, skirting close to the northern shore of Secretary Island, and then crossing across over to the other side of the sound to arrive at Dee's Cove. The Rocky Mountains were impressive. Crunch time was rapidly drawing upon us all for our return. Radio reception was a bit sketchy in Fiordland. VHF being line of sight, and high hills and steep-sided fjord walls meant being in the right spot at the right time to hear a weather forecast broadcast. was a bit hit and miss. My weather faxes were showing me the big picture, but more info the better in my book. For Christina, capable of 7 knots plus, pretty much regardless of the wind and the sea conditions, and a sound crew for regular watch rotations, she was gassed up and ready to roll north. She was going to be leaving first light, and if a forecast was favourable, she was going to charge on, or that, or duck into Milford Sound. As a solo sailor capable of an average of just 4 knots, I'm a tad more cautious. So plans were up in the air a bit as to how to approach the long haul up the west coast. It's a 4-day passage with realistically only 3 options of safe harbours. Jackson Bay, just up the way, and Greymouth and Westport. The latter two, Greymouth and Westport, are river mouths with significant flows most of the time. And the saying goes that if you ever really need to get into them, it's not going to be possible. In other words, if the weather conditions dictate seeking a safe harbour, then conditions will make entry impossible. Morning came early again for me in D Cove, and I again quietly slipped the lines in the dark and sailed out into the Tasman Sea. Low cloud hung on the fjords, enough wind to sail, sea a bit sloppy. As dawn broke, I could see Christina powering up the coast, already having overtaken me, and was just pulling away. A brief message on the VHF confirmed they'd got the favourable forecast they were wanting, and they were off. Next stop, Nelson for them. I was beginning to feel lonely already. I wasn't very comfortable with the forecast, so I decided on getting into Milford to evaluate the weather fully with an internet connection. It would be the first in a couple of weeks. The wind became a northerly, on the nose, another tacking duel up the coast ahead. I was feeling a bit cold too, and seriously sick of getting tossed around by what I was assuming was a cross sea bouncing off the coast. A hasty estimate on arrival time, including the long motoring up Milford Sound itself, meant I'd be entering Milford in near darkness. Not a good idea. So I decided to pack it in and regroup, try and get my head fully around the job at hand. Speaking of hands, I'd also made a gash in the soft flesh of my right hand between the thumb and forefinger on a stray seizing wire on an anchor shackle, weeks before. It wasn't healing, and it opened up daily, stinging in the salt water. So cold, lonely, sore hand, tired of getting tossed around, it was time to take stock of the situation and feel good about the task ahead. George Sound was the answer. One more big tack to starboard would get me into George Sound in good time. There was a secure anchorage with a freshwater hose available, all in daylight. Decision made. The AIS alarm went off. I looked to the horizon, and there it was, coming down the coast from the north. A huge cruise ship bearing down on me. I checked the laptop down below, and there was 2 of them. They were both on my path. A second one coming up from the south. Just off George Sound entrance, we would all come together. How Murphy was that? Back in the cockpit, I eyeballed them both and evaluated my options. The southbound one appeared to be altering its course, probably due to the northbound cruise ship, nothing to do with little old me, the meat in the sandwich. Then the VHF fired off. Sailing vessel Taranto, Taranto, Taranto. This is Fiordland Maritime Radio. Fiordland Maritime Radio. Do you copy? What the hell? I really don't use the VHF radio much. You need a licence for that, I believe. Don't get me wrong, I love the radio. I have a registered call sign, I listen to everything. I regularly hasten the flattening of my batteries by scanning as many channels as the units can take. I like to know who's out there and what they might be doing. It's entertaining. And should things go horribly wrong, I want to be able to contact others. Anyone within 20 kilometres listening to Channel 16 would do nicely in that scenario. But Fiordland Maritime Radio, calling me, what the heck? My first thought was the safety of my mates. Maybe something's happened to them. I shot down below and answered the call.
Well, check this out. My sister from Australia, bless her cotton socks, is worried about me because my tracker stopped working because I don't have internet and I haven't done for quite some time. Thank you very much for your concern. So I've just been called by Fiordland Maritime Radio. At the same time, I've got that cruise ship and that cruise ship. So I've been dodging ships. Yeah, so I've been dodging ships and taking phone calls. No, radio calls from maritime safety. But it's alright, I'm okay. I'm okay. There just is no connection from Foveaux Strait to about past, or Hokitika at least. So the track is not going to work for a long time, but hopefully I can pop into Milford, which I was planning on doing today, but I've failed that because of the northerly, so it's going to be George Sound, so it'll be tomorrow with a bit of luck. Thanks for your concern. It's nice to know they're out there.
It was me. They were looking for me, and they found me, and I didn't even know I was lost. My internet and cell phone network-based tracker had worked really well heading south, but it had lulled family and friends into a false sense of security. When we sailed across Foveaux Strait into the Fiordland wilderness, all coverage was lost. Without realising it, I'd dropped off the face of the earth, as far as folks who cared about me thought, and it had been 2 weeks. So my sister in West Australia had been able to telephone Maritime Safety in New Zealand, who from Wellington broadcast on Fiordland maritime radio frequency to put a call out seeking me. I responded, and he very kindly offered to telephone back West Australia to confirm my whereabouts and safety. And for that, I am sincerely grateful, not to mention seriously impressed.